Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. The Adel Residence in the quaint town of Isokan always seemed like a haven of love. Their 3-bedroom bungalow stood as a symbol of modest prosperity, a testament to the hard-working lives of Moses and Samantha Adel. The lush hibiscus plants lining the front yard were Samantha's pride, while the well-manicured lawn reflected Moses' attention to detail. They appeared to be the ideal couple, the kind that others admired and secretly envied. Moses Adel, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, carried himself with quiet confidence. His position as a manager at Golden Gates Enterprises provided him with a steady income that he took pride in. He had a knack for numbers and problem-solving, earning him respect among his colleagues and a sense of fulfillment. Samantha, on the other hand, was the star of her field. She had climbed the ranks at Pixel Innovations, a leading tech company, to become a team lead. Her intelligence, determination, and grace made her a formidable force both at work and at home. Their mornings were a ritual of harmony. Samantha, always the early riser, would brew a pot of coffee before Moses joined her in the kitchen, still groggy but smiling. Morning love, she'd greet him, placing a steaming mug in front of him. He'd respond with a tired grin, often mumbling something about needing to retire early one day to escape the grind. Samantha would laugh and tell him he was too young to think about retirement. Despite their shared moments of warmth, an unspoken tension sometimes crept into their conversations. It wasn't overt, nor did it disrupt their dynamic, but it lingered in the air like a faint scent of smoke after a fire. Moses loved his wife deeply, but there were moments when he felt eclipsed by her accomplishments. Samantha's salary far exceeded his, and while she never flaunted it, Moses couldn't ignore the way it highlighted his insecurities. One evening, as they sat on the couch after dinner, Moses casually broached the subject of finances. "Sam, don't you think it would make sense if we had a joint account? I mean, we are married. Shouldn't our money be together?" Samantha looked at him thoughtfully. "Moses, I've always believed that financial independence is important, even in marriage. It's not about trust. I trust you completely. But I think we should each have control over our own earnings. Besides, we split the bills fairly, don't we?" Her words were calm, but Moses felt a flicker of resentment. He didn't press the issue further, knowing it wasn't a battle he could win, but the exchange stayed with him. He told himself it wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. Yet deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that her refusal symbolized something more, something he wasn't ready to admit. Their weekends were a different story, filled with laughter and shared activities. They'd visit the farmer's market together, Moses carrying the bags while Samantha haggled for the best deals. In those moments, the tension dissolved, replaced by the simple joy of partnership. But even during those idyllic outings, Moses sometimes caught himself wondering what it would feel like to be the primary provider, to have Samantha rely on him rather than the other way around. Samantha, for her part, was oblivious to her husband's internal struggle. She adored Moses and admired his work ethic, never considering that her success might cause him pain. She often bragged about him to her colleagues, telling them how lucky she was to have a husband who supported her dreams. One evening, as they sat watching a documentary about successful women in tech, Moses asked, "Do you ever feel like people at work treat you differently because you're a woman?" Samantha paused, then nodded. "Sometimes, but I don't let it bother me. I've worked hard to get where I am, and I refuse to let anyone undermine that." Her answer was firm, but Moses couldn't help but feel a pang of inadequacy. He admired her strength, but also envied it. In his mind, a man should be the pillar of strength in a marriage, the one others looked up to. Yet here he was, married to a woman who seemed unshakable, while he wrestled with insecurities he couldn't voice. As they went to bed that night, Samantha drifted off to sleep almost immediately, her breathing steady and calm. Moses lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. He loved his wife, but he couldn't deny the growing shadow of resentment that threatened to consume him. The perfect marriage, it seemed, was not as perfect as it appeared. The morning began like any other for Moses Adel. He stood in front of the mirror, meticulously knotting his tie. His reflection stared back at him, a mixture of pride and determination in his eyes. He had always been a man who believed in routine and hard work. Samantha, still in her pajamas, leaned against the doorframe, sipping her coffee. "You look sharp," she said with a smile. Moses chuckled, smoothing down his shirt. "First impressions are everything. Today's a big day at work, end of quarter reports. I can't afford to look anything less than my best." Samantha nodded, unaware that this would be the last day Moses would leave their house for work as an employee of Golden Gates Enterprises. The day unraveled slowly, but unease hung in the air like a storm cloud. When Moses arrived at the office, he noticed the subdued atmosphere. Colleagues whispered in hushed tones, some glancing nervously toward the HR department. He brushed it off, chalking it up to the usual office drama. By midday, however, his manager called him into the conference room. The room felt colder than usual, and the HR officer's carefulest smile did little to ease the tension. Moses listened in disbelief as they explained the company's need to downsize due to financial constraints. "This isn't about your performance," the manager assured him. "You've been an exceptional employee, Moses. Unfortunately, we're left with no other choice." The words felt like a hammer blow to his chest. Moses sat frozen in his chair, staring at the severance package document in front of him. He had always prided himself on his work ethic, his ability to deliver results. How could they let him go? The walk back to his desk was agonizing. Colleagues avoided his gaze, their pity evident in their awkward movements. He packed his belongings in silence, his hands trembling as he placed framed photos of him and Samantha into a cardboard box. By the time he exited the building, the weight of his loss pressed heavily on his shoulders. When he arrived home earlier than usual, Samantha was surprised to see him. "You're back early. Everything okay?" she asked, setting aside her laptop. Moses hesitated, his throat tightening. "I've been laid off," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Samantha's expression shifted from surprise to concern, and she rushed to his side. "Oh, Moses, I'm so sorry," she said, wrapping her arms around him. "I know how hard this must be for you, but we'll get through it. You'll find something else, something even better." Her words were meant to comfort, but they stung. Moses appreciated her support, but a part of him hated that he now had to rely on her. He spent the evening staring at the television, though he couldn't focus on anything. Samantha prepared his favorite meal, jollof rice with fried plantains, but he barely touched his plate. In the weeks that followed, Moses threw himself into job applications. Every morning he sat at the dining table with his laptop, scouring job boards and tweaking his resume. Samantha would occasionally peek over his shoulder, offering suggestions or encouragement. At first he welcomed her involvement, but as rejection emails began piling up, her optimism felt suffocating. "Moses, why don't you take a break? Maybe go for a walk?" she suggested one afternoon when she found him hunched over the laptop, his face drawn with frustration. "I don't need a break, Samantha," he snapped, his tone sharper than he intended. "What I need is a job." Samantha stepped back, her expression a mix of hurt and understanding. "I'm just trying to help," she said softly before leaving him alone. The months dragged on, each rejection chipping away at Moses' confidence. His once structured routine dissolved into aimlessness. Samantha took over all the household expenses without complaint, but Moses couldn't ignore the growing imbalance in their relationship. He felt like a failure, a shadow of the man he used to be. One evening as they sat in silence, Samantha reached for his hand. "We'll get through this, Moses. You're not alone." Her words brought tears to his eyes, but he quickly blinked them away. He wanted to believe her, but the weight of his unemployment felt insurmountable. Deep down, resentment began to fester, not toward Samantha, but toward the situation that had stripped him of his pride and left him feeling powerless. Though he kept his feelings buried, the cracks in his facade were beginning to show. Moses couldn't shake the feeling that his marriage, once a source of strength, was now a mirror reflecting his inadequacies. And as much as Samantha tried to bridge the gap, Moses couldn't help but feel like he was slipping further away. The Adelic household had settled into a quiet rhythm that neither Moses nor Samantha found satisfying. While Samantha maintained her usual routine of heading to work every morning and coming home to share the events of her day, Moses' world had shrunk to the confines of their modest home. Each day bled into the next, marked only by the ping of his email inbox, which rarely brought the news he longed for. Samantha often wondered how best to support her husband. She had never seen him this withdrawn, his confidence stripped away by months of rejection. At first, she tried to encourage him with pep talks, but Moses' responses had grown curt. Over time, she learned to tread carefully, offering her support in quieter ways, making his favorite meals, leaving inspirational national notes on his desk, and ensuring he never felt judged. One evening, as she prepared for bed, Samantha glanced at Moses sitting on the edge of the couch, his laptop perched precariously on his knees. His face was illuminated by the glow of the screen, a deep furrow etched into his brow. She approached him slowly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "How's it going?" she asked softly. Moses let out a sigh, closing the laptop. Another day, another pile of rejections. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." Samantha sat beside him, her expression tender. "I know it's tough, but something will come up. You're smart, hardworking, and talented. Any company would be lucky to have you." Her words made Moses smile faintly, but deep inside they felt hollow. He wanted to believe her, but his faith in himself was dwindling. The following week, Samantha overheard a conversation at work that sparked an idea. During a team meeting, her manager mentioned an opening for a role that seemed perfectly suited for Moses. It wasn't a high-level position, but it came with the potential for growth. Samantha's immediate reaction was excitement, but as she considered it further, doubts began to creep in. Would Moses be comfortable working at the same company as her? Would he feel overshadowed by her position as his superior? She knew her husband's pride was a delicate thing, and she didn't want to risk making him feel even more inadequate. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Samantha debated whether to bring it up. Moses was in the living room, flipping through TV channels without much interest. She glanced at him, her heart aching for the man who had always been her rock. Taking a deep breath, she decided to trust her instincts. "Moses," she called out, her tone light but intentional. He turned to her, a questioning look in his eyes. "What's up?" "There's something I want to discuss with you," she began, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "I heard about a job opening at Pixel Innovations today. I think you'd be perfect for it." Moses raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "At your company?" "Yes," Samantha said cautiously. "It's not in my department, but it's a solid role with room for growth. I thought it might be worth considering." For a moment, Moses didn't respond. His pride waged war with his practicality. On one hand, the idea of working at Samantha's company made him uneasy, but on the other, he couldn't deny that he needed a fresh start. Finally, he nodded. "Tell me more about it." Samantha's face lit up with relief as she outlined the role and the application process. She even offered to review his resume and give him pointers for the interview. Moses agreed, though a small part of him bristled at needing her help. Over the next few days, they worked together to prepare his application. Moses couldn't help but notice how excited Samantha seemed, as though she had as much riding on this as he did. Her enthusiasm softened his resistance, and for the first time in months he felt a glimmer of hope. When Moses was invited for an interview, Samantha celebrated the news with genuine joy. She took the day off work to help him pick out an outfit and practice his responses to potential questions. Though he initially felt awkward, Moses soon found himself relaxing under her guidance. The interview itself went better than he had expected. The panel seemed impressed with his experience and ideas, and by the time he walked out of the room, he felt a spark of confidence he hadn't felt in months. A week later, when the job offer came through, Samantha was the first person Moses called. "I got it," he said, his voice trembling with disbelief. Samantha's scream of joy echoed through the phone. "I knew you could do it," she exclaimed. "I'm so proud of you, Moses." That evening they celebrated with a quiet dinner at home. For the first time in a long while, Moses felt like he had regained a piece of himself. But as he sat across from Samantha, watching her eyes sparkle with happiness, a nagging thought crept into his mind. He was stepping into her world, and he wasn't sure how it would feel to navigate it with her towering above him. Moses' first day at Pixel Innovations felt like a new beginning. The office, with its sleek design and buzzing energy, was a stark contrast to the more traditional environment of Golden Gates Enterprises. The open floor plan, with its glass partitions and collaborative spaces, gave an air of endless possibilities. He took in his surroundings with a mix of awe and nervousness, determined to make a good impression. Samantha had been careful not to make a big deal of his arrival. She had casually introduced him to a few colleagues but avoided drawing attention to the fact that they were married. Moses appreciated this. He didn't want to be known as Samantha's husband, but rather as a capable professional in his own right. In the early days, things were smooth. Moses found his footing quickly, proving himself to be a diligent and insightful employee. He threw himself into his work, eager to prove that he belonged. His colleagues were welcoming, and his supervisor praised his efforts during his first review. At home, Samantha beamed with pride whenever he shared snippets of his progress. But as the weeks turned into months, subtle cracks began to appear in Moses' sense of contentment. Working in the same company, as Samantha brought him into closer proximity to her world, a world where she was admired, respected, and most importantly, in a position of authority. Her name seemed to come up in every meeting, often mentioned with a tone of admiration. Moses tried to ignore the comments at first. After all, he had known Samantha was successful long before he joined the company. But now, seeing her in action and witnessing the high regard in which she was held, he began to feel his pride wavering. The first time it truly hit him was during a department meeting where Samantha, as a senior team lead, presented a project update. She commanded the room effortlessly, her confidence and eloquence earning nods of approval and murmurs of agreement. Moses sat at the back, unnoticed and unacknowledged, feeling like a spectator in her world. Later that day, a colleague named Victor patted Moses on the back. "Your wife is incredible," he said with a grin. "It must be inspiring to live with someone so sharp." Moses forced a smile, but Victor's words gnawed at him. Was he inspiring to her? Did she look at him with the same admiration that her colleagues did? At home, Moses found himself retreating into silence more often. Samantha, busy with her own demanding schedule, didn't immediately notice the shift. She still shared stories about her day, often oblivious to the subtle tension building within her husband. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Samantha mentioned an upcoming project. "It's a huge deal," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "If this goes well, I might get a promotion." Moses froze mid-bite. A promotion? She was already earning more than him, already outranking him at work. The thought of her climbing even higher while he remained at the same level sent a pang of resentment through him. "That's great," he said, forcing his voice to sound enthusiastic. "Thanks," Samantha replied, her smile genuine. "I couldn't have done any of this without your support." Her words, though sincere, felt like salt on a wound. Moses wanted to feel proud of her, to bask in her accomplishments, but instead he felt as though her success was a reminder of his shortcomings. As the days went on, Moses' insecurities deepened. He became hypersensitive to any mention of Samantha at work, interpreting compliments about her as indirect criticisms of himself. Even innocent comments from colleagues, "Samantha's so innovative," or "I'm learning so much from her," felt like tiny daggers to his pride. At home, the once easy camaraderie between them grew strained. Samantha noticed his quietness but attributed it to work stress, unaware of the storm brewing within him. She tried to cheer him up with little gestures, his favorite meal, a surprise weekend outing, but Moses' smiles were half-hearted. In his darkest moments, Moses began questioning whether Samantha truly respected him. Did she see him as an equal or merely as someone she had to support? These thoughts kept him awake at night, his mind racing with doubts and insecurities. Yet, despite his growing bitterness, Moses couldn't bring himself to voice his feelings. He told himself it was because he didn't want to burden Samantha, but deep down, he feared her response. What if she confirmed his worst fears? What if she truly thought less of him? As the tension within him grew, so did the distance between them. Samantha, still unaware of the depth of his inner turmoil, continued to shine at work, oblivious to the shadow her success was casting over her husband. And Moses, unable to confront his feelings, allowed his resentment to fester, setting the stage for what would become the beginning of their undoing. Moses Adel was no stranger to hard work or ambition, but lately his ambitions had taken a darker turn. Working alongside Samantha had unearthed feelings he hadn't fully understood before, envy, inadequacy, and a bitter resentment he couldn't shake. Each day at Pixel Innovations felt like a reminder of his perceived inferiority, and while Samantha remained oblivious, her success had become the thorn in his side. It started innocently enough. Moses found himself paying closer attention to Samantha's work, not out of admiration but a growing curiosity about how everything seemed to come so easily to her. During lunch breaks or casual conversations, he'd listen as colleagues spoke glowingly of her leadership skills and creative problem solving. He forced himself to nod in agreement, but their words left a sour taste in his mouth. At home, the once lively conversations between husband and wife began to dwindle. Samantha was too preoccupied to notice that Moses no longer asked about her projects or offered suggestions. Instead, he observed her from the sidelines, taking note of her weaknesses, rare as they were, and filing them away in the recesses of his mind. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Samantha was reviewing a presentation for an important project she was leading. Her laptop screen glowed brightly as she clicked through slides, occasionally jotting down notes. Moses sat nearby, scrolling through his phone but barely paying attention to the screen. His eyes flickered toward her laptop, and for the first time a thought crept into his mind, a thought he quickly dismissed. No, he told himself, he wasn't that kind of man. He couldn't stoop so low. But as the days went on, the thought persisted. It whispered to him during quiet moments at work, during the long drive home, and even as he lay awake at night. The temptation grew stronger, fueled by the belief that Samantha's success was overshadowing his own. The first time he acted on his impulses, it was almost accidental. Samantha had forgotten to log out of her work email on their shared home computer. Moses sat down to check his own email and noticed her account still open. For a moment he hesitated. Then curiosity got the better of him. His fingers hovered over the mouse as he scrolled through her inbox. Most of the emails were routine, but a few contained sensitive information about ongoing projects. Moses' heart raced as he read them. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but the act itself felt thrilling, like a small rebellion against the shadow he felt he was living under. At work, Moses began to exploit the information he had gleaned. He made subtle suggestions during meetings, ideas he knew would conflict with Samantha's plans. When colleagues asked for clarification, he played dumb, feigning ignorance. His goal wasn't to sabotage her outright, not yet, but to sow seeds of doubt among their peers. Samantha noticed the shift in office dynamics but couldn't pinpoint the cause. Meetings that once felt collaborative now seemed tense, with colleagues questioning her decisions more frequently. She confided in Moses one evening, expressing her frustration. "I don't know what's going on," she said, running a hand through her hair. "It's like people don't trust me anymore. I've always been transparent with my team, but now I feel like I'm walking on eggshells." Moses offered a sympathetic nod, masking the satisfaction bubbling beneath the surface. "Maybe it's just a phase," he said. "You've always been a great leader. They'll come around." His words were hollow, but Samantha believed them. She leaned on him for support, unaware that he was the very source of her growing troubles. Over the next few weeks, Moses' actions became bolder. He began leaking small bits of information to colleagues he knew would gossip. A poorly timed suggestion here, an exaggerated critique there, it all began to add up. Slowly but surely, Samantha's once sterling reputation began to tarnish. At home, Moses played the role of the supportive husband to perfection. He listened patiently as Samantha vented her frustrations, offering advice that seemed thoughtful on the surface, but subtly encouraged her self-doubt. "Maybe you're taking on too much," he'd suggest. "You've been under so much pressure lately. It's okay to step back a little." Samantha, though strong-willed, began to internalize his words. She questioned her decisions more often, second-guessed her instincts, and even considered delegating key tasks to avoid further scrutiny. Moses watched with a mix of guilt and satisfaction as his plan began to take shape. One evening as they lay in bed, Samantha turned to him with a tired smile. "Thank you for always being there for me," she said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Moses felt a pang of shame but quickly buried it. In his mind, he had convinced himself that his actions were justified, a necessary step to reclaim his sense of worth. Samantha's gratitude only fueled his resolve, solidifying the belief that he was doing what needed to be done. Unbeknownst to Samantha, the seeds Moses had planted were beginning to bear fruit. And as the tension in their workplace grew, so did the cracks in their marriage, cracks that neither of them could yet see, but that threatened to shatter everything they had built together. Samantha Adelic sat at her desk in her brightly lit office, staring at her computer screen, but her mind was far from the task at hand. The past few months had been a whirlwind of confusion and frustration. Projects that used to run smoothly now seemed plagued with unforeseen obstacles. Her team, once cohesive and motivated, appeared disjointed and uncooperative. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted without warning, leaving her off balance in a place that once felt secure. Her instincts told her something was wrong, but she couldn't identify the source. Samantha had always prided herself on her ability to navigate challenges, but this felt different. The disapproval in her colleagues' eyes, the murmurs that stopped when she entered a room, the veiled criticisms from her superiors, all of it weighed heavily on her. At home, Moses' support remained steadfast, or so it seemed. He listened patiently as she vented her frustrations and offered comforting words when she expressed doubt. "You're overthinking it," he said one evening as they sat in the living room. "You've been successful for years, Sam. Don't let a rough patch make you question yourself." His words were soothing, but Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a rough patch. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Samantha was called into an impromptu meeting with her department's senior management. She entered the conference room with a polite smile, though her stomach churned with unease. The room was unusually quiet, the air thick with tension. Her manager, a composed woman named Angela, folded her hands on the table and began speaking in a measured tone. "Samantha, we've been reviewing your recent performance and we've identified several concerns. There have been lapses in project management, breaches of protocol, and issues that have put the company at risk." Samantha's breath caught in her throat. I don't understand," she stammered. "I've always adhered to company policies, and I'm not aware of any breaches." Angela exchanged a glance with another manager before sliding a folder across the table. "These documents suggest otherwise," she said. With trembling hands, Samantha opened the folder. Inside were emails and reports she had supposedly signed off on, containing errors and inconsistencies that she couldn't recall making. Her eyes darted across the pages, her mind racing to piece together how this could have happened. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "I would never approve these kinds of decisions." Angela's expression remained neutral. "We've already conducted an internal review. Unfortunately, the evidence is clear. Effective immediately, we are terminating your employment." The words hit Samantha like a punch to the gut. She sat frozen in her chair, unable to process what was happening. Her mind screamed in protest. This couldn't be real. She had dedicated years to this company, poured her heart and soul into every project. How could it all unravel so quickly? When she finally found her voice, it was weak and trembling. "I don't understand how this could happen," she whispered. "I've always been diligent, always." Angela sighed. "I understand this is difficult, Samantha, but our decision is final. Security will escort you to collect your belongings." As Samantha walked out of the office with a box of her things, she felt the weight of shame pressing down on her. Colleagues avoided her gaze, their silence cutting deeper than any words could. By the time she reached her car, tears streamed down her face. That evening, Samantha sat on the couch in their living room, staring blankly at the wall. Moses walked in, feigning surprise at her early return. "You're home already?" he asked, his voice filled with false concern. "I was fired," she said flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. Moses' face shifted into an expression of sympathy as he sat beside her. "Oh, Sam, I'm so sorry. What happened?" Samantha shook her head. "I don't know. They said I made mistakes, but I can't figure out how. None of it makes sense." Moses placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise," he said softly. "You've been overworked for so long. This might be an opportunity to take a break, focus on yourself." His words, though meant to comfort, only deepened her despair. Samantha nodded weakly, too drained to argue. She spent the next few days in a daze, trying to make sense of her sudden fall from grace. At night, when Moses thought she was asleep, Samantha replayed every detail in her mind. She thought about the projects she'd led, the emails she'd sent, the decisions she'd made. Nothing added up. Something about the whole situation felt orchestrated, deliberate. Samantha had always trusted Moses implicitly, believing in the foundation of their marriage. But now, as she lay awake in the darkness, an unbidden thought began to creep into her mind. Could it be possible that the betrayal she felt at work was closer to home than she realized? For now, she pushed the thought away, unwilling to face what it might mean. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and Samantha's resolve to uncover the truth was beginning to grow. Samantha Adelic sat in the dim light of her study, her laptop open in front of her. The hum of the house was faint, with Moses asleep in the bedroom, blissfully unaware that she had stayed up late again. It had been 2 months since her dismissal from Pixel Innovations, and the questions still swirled in her mind. No matter how many times she tried to push them aside, they refused to leave. Something was wrong. The inconsistencies, the sudden accusations, the fabricated evidence, none of it aligned with the years she had spent building her reputation at the company. What began as a gut feeling had turned into an obsession. Samantha found herself replaying events in her mind, meticulously analyzing the timeline leading up to her dismissal. It started small, missed details on projects, emails she never remembered sending, whispers she could never trace. The pieces didn't fit, and she was determined to make sense of the puzzle. One evening, while reviewing old files, Samantha noticed something odd. An email that had been used against her during the investigation was still saved in her outbox. She opened it, her eyes scanning the contents carefully. The tone, the phrasing, it felt foreign, almost as though someone else had written it. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she checked the email's metadata, something she had learned during her years in tech. What she found sent a chill down her spine. The email had been sent from her account, but not from her device. It had been logged from an IP address she didn't recognize. Samantha's breath quickened as she stared at the screen, her mind racing. Someone had access to her account, someone close enough to know her credentials. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a random act, it was deliberate. Her thoughts immediately turned to her colleagues, but the idea seemed implausible. The betrayal felt too personal, too calculated. And then, like a shadow creeping into her mind, the thought she had been avoiding took shape. Moses. The idea was almost unthinkable, but the more she considered it, the harder it became to dismiss. Moses had access to her devices, he knew her passwords, and he had been there through every step of her downfall, offering comfort while quietly encouraging her to doubt herself. Samantha's heart pounded as she dug deeper. Over the next few nights, she scoured their shared computer for any trace of his involvement. At first, she found nothing, but her persistence paid off when she stumbled upon a folder hidden in an obscure corner of the hard drive. Inside were copies of emails, project files, and even documents related to her dismissal. Her hands trembled as she opened file after file, the evidence stacking up like bricks in a wall she couldn't ignore. One file stood out, a draft email sent to her manager, filled with fabricated errors and false claims of incompetence. The language was eerily familiar, echoing phrases Moses often used during their conversations. Samantha's stomach churned as she realized he had been feeding her doubts, weaponizing her trust against her. Her mind reeled with memories of their conversations, his subtle suggestions, his carefully crafted reassurances. The man she had trusted with her life had orchestrated her downfall, all while playing the role of a supportive husband. Samantha's initial shock gave way to a surge of anger. How could he do this to her? What had she ever done to deserve such betrayal? She thought about the years she had spent supporting him, standing by his side through every challenge, only to have him tear her down out of envy. Confronting Moses wasn't an option, not yet. Samantha knew she needed more than just circumstantial evidence. She needed to ensure that when the time came, there would be no denying the truth. Over the next week, Samantha reached out to a former colleague, Alex, someone she trusted implicitly. She shared her suspicions in vague terms, carefully omitting details about Moses. Alex agreed to help, offering to access company logs to trace the origins of the emails and files used against her. When Alex called a few days later, the confirmation was undeniable. The logs pointed directly to Moses' workstation. Samantha's worst fears had been realized. That night, she sat in the living room, staring at Moses as he watched television, completely unaware of the storm brewing within her. His laughter at the sitcom felt like an insult, a mockery of the pain he had caused her. Samantha clenched her fists, her mind racing with plans. But she knew she couldn't act impulsively. Moses had taken everything from her, her career, her confidence, her reputation. If she was going to confront him, she needed to be strategic, calculated, and unrelenting. As Samantha retreated to the bedroom that night, she glanced at Moses one last time. The man she had once loved and admired was now a stranger, a shadow of the person she thought she knew. And while he may have thought he had won, Samantha knew the game was far from over. The truth had been unveiled, and Samantha was determined to make him pay for every ounce of pain he had inflicted. The betrayal had cut deep, but had also awakened a resolve within her, a resolve that Moses would soon come to regret. The quiet tension in the Adel household had become almost unbearable, though only Samantha was aware of its full weight. The evidence of Moses' betrayal burned in her mind, replaying over and over like a haunting melody. She had spent weeks piecing together the truth, but now the question remained: how would she exact her revenge? Samantha wasn't one for impulsive decisions, not after everything she had been through. She knew that her response had to be deliberate, calculated, and above all, decisive. Moses had taken something precious from her, not just her job, but her sense of security and trust. She wanted him to feel the gravity of his actions, to understand the pain he had caused. One morning, Samantha awoke before Moses, her resolve solidified. She had spent the previous night planning every detail of her next steps, ensuring that no aspect of her strategy would be left to chance. She brewed coffee as she always did, placing a cup on the kitchen counter for him when he eventually stumbled out of the bedroom. "Morning," Moses mumbled, rubbing his eyes as he reached for the coffee. "Morning," Samantha replied, her tone even. She watched him carefully, studying his every move. He had no idea what was coming. Over the next few days, Samantha began to put her plan into action. First, she reached out to her former employer, Pixel Innovations, armed with the undeniable evidence she had collected. She scheduled a meeting with senior management, presenting them with a detailed timeline of Moses' sabotage, complete with emails, files, and witness accounts from Alex. The executives were stunned, their initial skepticism giving way to outrage as they realized the extent of Moses' deceit. "We had no idea," Angela, her former manager, said during the meeting. "We trusted him. I'm so sorry, Samantha." Samantha nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "It's not just about me," she replied. "This was a calculated attack on the company as well. You need to make this right." Pixel Innovations launched an internal investigation immediately, and the fallout was swift. Moses was called into a meeting with the company's leadership, unaware that Samantha had already set the wheels in motion. He walked into the boardroom with his usual air of confidence, but it quickly dissipated as the allegations were laid before him. The evidence was irrefutable. Emails sent from his account, unauthorized access to confidential files, and witness statements all painted a damning picture. Moses stammered, trying to deny the accusations, but his words fell flat against the mountain of proof. By the time the meeting ended, Moses' fate was sealed. He was terminated on the spot, escorted out of the building by security as whispers rippled through the office. When Moses returned home that evening, Samantha was waiting for him. She sat at the dining table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her expression unreadable. "Moses," she said calmly as he entered the room, his face pale and drawn. He hesitated, his gaze darting around the room as though searching for an escape. "Samantha, I can explain." "Save it," she interrupted, her voice cold and firm. "I know everything, the lies, the sabotage, the betrayal. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" Moses sank into a chair, his shoulders slumped. I didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered weakly. Samantha's eyes narrowed, her anger barely contained. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? Moses, you destroyed my career. You humiliated me, undermined me, and for what? To soothe your fragile ego?" He opened his mouth to respond, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify what you did. The man I thought I married would never have done this. But clearly I was wrong about you." Moses sat in silence, his head bowed. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, but Samantha wasn't finished. "I filed for divorce," she said, her voice steady but devoid of emotion. "And before you think about fighting it, know that I've ensured you'll leave this marriage with nothing. The house, the savings, everything. You've lost it all, just like you made me lose everything I worked for." Moses' head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "Samantha, please." "No," she cut him off. "I gave you everything, Moses, my trust, my support, my love. And you repaid me with betrayal. You don't deserve my forgiveness." The finality in her tone left no room for argument. Samantha stood, her posture tall and unyielding, and walked out of the room, leaving Moses alone with his guilt and regret. As the days passed, Samantha began to rebuild her life piece by piece. The road ahead was daunting, but she faced it with the strength and resilience that Moses had underestimated. And while Moses remained a shadow of his former self, Samantha thrived, determined never to let anyone undermine her again. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.